Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Katie Earle, and I'm the coordinator of the University Express program, and I work for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. And yes, I am aware my volume is a little lower. I do apologize for that, but you'll be able to hear Amy and Gary just fine, and that's really all that matters today. So we are recording this session, and I'll try to post it on our website in the near future. For those of you who are new, you've joined muted and without your video showing, and it's not because you've done anything wrong. That's just the settings for our program here today. And if you have questions throughout Amy and Gary's presentation, feel free to type that in the Q&A panel. If you're on a computer, it's going to be the lower right-hand side of your screen. Click on that, expand it, type your questions in, send them to me, click send, or you may have to press enter on your keyboard. I just learned that the other day. If you're on a tablet or smartphone, touch your screen. That'll bring up your control panel. You'll see that circle with 3 dots. Then you'll see your Q&A, and same thing for you. So while I'm going through here, I'm going to open a poll so we see what you guys are doing. And I'd like to thank the sponsors of our program, which is our Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans for all of their support. And at Senior Services, we're always here for you, and we're at 858-8526. Now I will start introducing our speakers. Amy Alduino is the Erie County Recycling Coordinator, and she provides outreach and education on recycling and waste reduction to businesses, residents, students, and communities. She recently worked with Erie County communities to create a 10-year planning document to manage solid waste and improve recycling and reuse in Erie County. Very exciting. She's also part of the University of Buffalo-led research consortium working on issues related to disaster debris. In her career, Amy has coordinated a sustainable business roundtable, managed a statewide brownfield cleanup grant program in Ohio, and worked as an environmental consultant in Ohio, Arizona, and Nevada. So welcome, Amy. And now Gary. Gary Carrel is a solid waste recycling specialist in the Erie County Department of Environment and Planning with responsibilities related to hazardous waste, waste reduction, and recycling. He provides information to both residents and departments within Erie County on ways to promote reuse, reduction, and recycling. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to release the results. Additionally, Gary has been actively involved with numerous environmentally based groups and organizations in the Buffalo area and is currently co-chair of the Western New York Earth Day Steering Committee. He's the vice president of the New York State Association of Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling, where he is chair of their single-use plastics committee and a member of the annual conference planning committee. So we have some fabulous people here with us today. I will stop talking and turn it over to you. Thank you both for being here.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Katie. We appreciate that. I see I have not updated my bio. I am now president of NYSAR, and which is the New York State Association of Reduction, Reuse, Recycling, and actually gave up my position as chair of the Single-Use Plastic Committee because I couldn't handle all those things going on. But yes, I'm thrilled. That's a recent change. So thanks everybody for joining us. And we do see that we have a couple of composters here, which, it's very possible you know more than we do. And if that's the case, if you find that we have said something incorrect, you are welcome. I can't go. Oops. Sorry, I can't get to this. You are welcome to correct us in the Q&A box, of course. Slideshow, there we go. All right. Can everybody see that? All right, good. Thank you, Katie. So yeah, we're thrilled that you're joining us today to talk about composting, but we're going to go a little broader than that, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
One of the biggest topics we're seeing right now in the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, is organics. And we're looking at food waste in a bunch of different ways. We're looking at it from businesses and food that could be donated, and also for residential. So let's start with why food is wasted. I mean, it turns out we're actually wasting a whole bunch of food on average. On average, Americans are wasting about 20% of the food that you're purchasing. And it turns out that most businesses are wasting about 6% of the food that they are purchasing, that they're either unable to sell it or they have to donate it or it's just waste stuff. So there's a whole bunch of money spent either in homes or at businesses to make food that's not actually being used. So that's one of the things that we and businesses are trying to work on. So having lists, figuring out what you're going to do with leftovers, not cooking too much if you don't like leftovers. And I know for me, I mean, one of the problems is that, you know, things come in bigger packages a lot of the time than I need. You know, I don't need X amount of, I don't need a whole thing of celery, but I end up buying a whole thing of celery. So all of those things are things that individually and as communities that we need to work on, because it's better for our community. It's better for our garbage bills, because actually organic materials, the food that's thrown out, is the heaviest part of your garbage. And so you're paying for it because we pay based on weight. So heavy stuff weighs more. It's food that you're buying, money you could be spending somewhere else. And it's something that we're going to be working on. So next slide, please. So this is our little visual. I mean, 20%. So 1 out of every 5 bags of groceries that you buy is really being wasted on average. I'm not saying you, probably me. And, you know, is it in the back of your fridge and you didn't get to the date on time? Is it just a leftover that you forgot to put in your lunch? Is it something that, you know, spoiled before you used it? There's all sorts of reasons, but something that, you know, looking at your home systems, and businesses are looking at business systems to try and figure out how to reduce that. Next slide, please. So this is municipal solid waste, MSW, which is everything that goes into the landfill. And as you can see, about 15% of what goes into the landfill is food waste, and about 13% is yard trimmings. So if we could keep, you know, less of this from going into our landfills, we have more landfill space. And as I said, it costs our communities and, you know, indirectly ourselves less for garbage if we're able to keep some of these things out. Next slide. And these things can be composted. So food waste for home composting, the food waste we're talking about is really mostly vegetables, because you need to keep pests out of your home composting. So no meat, no dairy, the things like that. But your vegetables can be, you know, taken out of the garbage and put into.
And we will get very specifically into that. So yeah. But our point is, it's better, you know, the less that we can waste, the better.
Yes. And next slide, and turning it over to Gary.
All right. So as long as I'm talking, and I just wanted to reiterate what Amy said, that you know, each of our municipalities has to budget for these costs. And you may have heard the, you know, costs related to recycling keep increasing, which is having, you know, huge impacts on our municipalities' budgets. And so one way that we can help that is to create less garbage. And, you know, so this is part of why we're talking about this, and why compost. But so, all right. So, and look, they're cheaper than throwing it in the garbage. So, whereas, I mean, you might not be directly paying, although there are a few municipalities where you directly pay for garbage hauling. It's usually not based on weight. It's, you know, it's usually a standard cost, whereas our municipalities are paying for weight. So any way that we can, as a resident, help our municipalities to save money, it's going to benefit everybody. But really, compost is such a great beneficial product to have to help in our gardens. And it's also, if you're making your own compost, obviously there's some savings with that. And this is why. I mean, adding the compost to your garden or even to the lawn, it improves the soil. It's obviously, if you're not having to purchase this stuff, you're saving money, or you are being more green, if you will. And that's a huge benefit to creating our own compost. And the thing that I don't know that people think about as much is that we need to really help the quality of our soil, especially if you've done any looking into this. Our soil today compared to maybe 30 to 50 years ago, it just does not have the type of nutrients that it did at that time for a variety of reasons. Part of that is all the use of commercial fertilizers. So your own personal garden, whether it's flower garden, vegetable garden, shrubs, you want to keep track of ways to enhance that soil, and using compost is just a fantastic way to do that. If you really are curious about your soil, the Cornell Cooperative Extension Master Gardeners Program does have a way that you can they will test your soil for you, so you can figure out, it's too acidic or things like that. So there are certainly ways, and I'm sure there are plenty of things that you could send away for and purchase on your own. But Master Gardeners is a tremendous resource. So here you see, by using the compost, we're basically nurturing the soil. I mean, that's really what it's all about. And it doesn't say this here, but a layer of compost is also going to help keep your weeds down. And that's a huge benefit, especially if you've done the work on weeding and then you put your compost on top. It can really make a big difference. And then here, I am gonna emphasize this, that synthetic fertilizers, it adds nitrogen to our entire system. So yes, it does make the plants grow a little better and maybe a little bigger, but that nitrogen, it does not stay in our gardens. When it rains, it becomes part of the stormwater system, and all of anything we put on our ground ends up in the lake. It ends up in Lake Erie ultimately. So the more synthetic fertilizers we use, the more problems, and Amy actually knows more about this than I do, but that results in these algae blooms that we hear about. Not quite as much in this part of Lake Erie. I think it's more near Cleveland, maybe. That's where they've been having. Is that right, Amy? Is that where they've been having?
Cleveland's had some problems. Toledo's had the worst problems, where they actually were unable to use their municipal water for days on end because they had a toxic algal bloom due to fertilizers,
variety
fertilizers and residential fertilizers combining to add so much nutrient load that it exploded the algae.
And people always say to me, well, what can I do? And whether it's composting or any of these issues that we talk about, and I always say, yeah, if it's only me or if it's only you, then our impact is going to be small. But if everybody begins to take on a little bit responsibility here, that is what can really make a big difference. That's another reason why we are out there, preaching the gospel, if you will. All right, so we just want to, hopefully I can do this. Got to stop sharing. We just want to show an action. Right, share. Sorry, that wasn't it. Try one more time. Just it's the composting process. Listen. Well, did I accidentally close this? I'm sorry about this. You give it one more shot here. Okay, there it is. What are you seeing right now? Anybody?
You have to hit play.
Oh, but you can see this? Okay.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right. So there is no sound here, but just check. This is a nice composting process. This is just a minute long video. So that's some nice finished compost there. And then this is talking about the compost process, all those fun little bacteria and bugs that get in there and do their work. And you see how they're mixing the compost. That's part of the key in this whole process, keeping our compost aerated, watered. All right, so thank you, Stop the Waste, for giving us that. So you see the process. You see how, right, stop sharing. Aren't I smooth, Katie?
You're a pro, Gary.
Right, back to this. All right. Should be working. Slide. Okay. All right. So just a little bit more about the actual science-based, of the compost. There's the food and the yard scraps that are in the compost pile, and there's the microorganisms that that we never see, and the worms and the bugs, and everything is working together on this material. The humus, which isn't the kind of hummus that we eat, but that is a byproduct, as is the carbon dioxide and heat. If any of you have a compost pile, the center of a compost pile can be almost 120 degrees. That's all these processes that are going on. That generates the heat, which is what breaks down, which was what we saw in that video. Everything breaking down and turning into this golden. I mean, compost is almost comparable to gold, because think about going to the store and having to buy all this compost, as opposed to having it, being able to create some of it yourself. So just a little. So and the key here to remember is this carbon and nitrogen. I mean, that is really, as far as to being a backyard composter, it's the carbon and nitrogen, the greens and the browns, that we really is key to getting to growing the right compost. So the browns are your dry waste, and the greens are the stuff that's going to break down, the food waste, some of your yard waste and things like that. And knowing this, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So two greens to 1 brown. And that is probably a real key to creating a good compost system. We called this presentation, what did we call it, Amy? Composting. It's all about the balance. And that is so true, because and I'll tell you, if you are starting out, there will be some trial and error in getting this right, exactly, because you'll figure out what you've got. I mean, and you may have to, you may have to get some browns. One of the things we recommend is for people to save their leaves from the fall, and those are great to add to your compost pile if you need more grounds to create this balance. There we go. 2 parts green to 1 part brown. Forgot. Yeah. See that? That's pretty nifty, huh? That's our big fun here. The things to keep in mind for composting. So if you put a big piece of branch in there, like something, something breaks off the tree and you just stick a big branch in there, it's not going to break down. You've got to break that up. If you, throw an apple in, let's say the apple sat too long, the example that Amy gave, our 20% of the food that we waste. If you throw the apple in there whole, it's going to take forever to break down. So you got to cut it up. You've got to, that's part of this mixing. So again, the, sort of the science part of doing this composting. And then, moisture is so important. You basically, for the most part, will be watering your compost pile. In general, you want to be checking your compost pile at least weekly. And it should be the consistency of a wrung out sponge. So if you check your compost pile and it's dry, it's very simple, just get the sprinkler, add some water, or sometimes, you can take advantage of the rain, and that's going to obviously add some of the water to your compost pile. The other thing is air. Air is super important in your compost pile, so that's why the mixing, turning your pile. You saw in that video that they kept getting in there and turning things, so that's a really important part of this. There are a lot of different apparatuses that you can use. Like a pitchfork is good. It depends on the type of compost unit you're working with or pile. A shovel, I can tell you, just does not work. You can't get down far enough. You need something with those forks. And even a pole that you can poke some holes in to your compost is super helpful. You want to get that air flowing. The air is certainly as important. And now, what does that say? Some phytotoxins and alcohols can harm plants. So again, the processes that are going on. So if something, maybe you've put a little too much of something into your compost pile, it might be producing some materials that are going to be harmful. If they get mixed up, that any of those problems are going to be mitigated.
Right, and it's also saying that if you don't aerate it enough, you can create it. It'll be smellier. Hydrogen sulfide is that rotten egg smell, and so that's why keeping it aerobic, making sure that there's air in there on a regular thing, will not only make the process occur faster, but it will also keep the smells down.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. That's a super good point. You don't have to pay attention to your compost pile, but if you don't, there's going to be problems. So I guess you do have to pay a bit of attention to your compost pile. There is composting that you can do that you can just sort of leave it, but it's going to take a lot longer, and there is going to be problems. So basically, if you're committing to backyard composting, just like cutting the lawn or doing the weeding, you're going to have to keep up with it. Oh, look at that! I had another. So again, keeping track of that carbon nitrogen ratio, will speed up. So this is where it's once you're doing it, and you'll see, well, gee, why isn't why don't I see more happening? Why isn't it hot enough? So this is where you're going to go. Well, then it looks like I need a little more nitrogen, things like that. Less carbon. So here is a great visual piece that Amy did that we were referring to before. These are all the things that can go in your backyard composter, as well as things that should not go into your backyard composter. So the one thing that we will note is that weeds, you really don't want to put a lot of weeds into your backyard composter, because again, unless you have that heat high enough, it may not kill the weeds, and then all of a sudden you're going to spread them into your compost. So the suggestion is, if you're doing weeding, go ahead and, don't include that in the compost. For those of you that might live in a municipality that actually collects your yard waste and takes it to a compost facility, those compost facilities, their heat is high enough where it will kill diseased plants and weeds, and you don't have to worry too much about that. But again, unless you are a super composter, you just want to avoid that. Coffee grounds, that's a good one. Every day you can throw your coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are also good around certain types of plants that need a more acidic base. You can use that. Shredded paper. Now again, if you clean out a cabinet and you have a huge amount of shredded paper, that's going to overwhelm the system. So that's a carbon source. So you want to, again, be making sure you've got your ratios right. But that's a excellent source of carbon that you can use. And how great that your shredded paper is, going into the ground. So that's cool.
Right. And shredded paper is actually something that we shouldn't be putting into our recycle bin. So if it's paper sheets, you can recycle it. But if it's shredded paper, it's actually best for your compost bin.
Yeah. And although if you don't compost, and what the companies that do the recycling ask is that we do not put our shredded paper in a plastic bag. You should not be putting any plastic bags in your recycling. So if you do, oh wait, I'm wrong about that. They
really don't want shredded paper because it just makes a mess everywhere. It makes a mess in the trucks, makes a mess falling out of the trucks. It makes a mess at the recycling facilities. So,
but yeah, a lot of people are putting their shredded paper into plastic bags, and that's still just getting thrown away. Because anytime they see a plastic bag, that's coming out of the line and getting thrown away. So, and grass clippings I will address a little bit later, because again, grass clippings are good for your compost pile, but not if you put too much in. Again, that carbon nitrogen ratio, really important. So if you may overwhelm your compost pile, so just be careful of that. So now we're going to talk about the different types of ways that you can compost, and I'm going to turn this over to Amy to talk about how we, different ways that different systems you can use, different units.
So you can go from very basic to very fancy. You can compost by getting some old materials and reusing them for your containment area, or you can buy a super fancy unit or something in between. One of the things though is that if you're doing the very basic stuff, know what your municipality allows. Sometimes, especially if you're doing food waste composting, there are more concerns to make sure that you are not attracting pests. For yard waste,
yeah, so that's a good point. I mean, if you're citing your compost pile, your unit, check with your municipality's rules, because several municipalities have very specific ways they want that done, and a few don't want composting. So, or if they do, they want it in a closed container. So you just want to be sure you're following those.
So there actually is earthworm composting, vermicomposting, and it's pretty cool. It is more intensive than having a compost system in your backyard. We actually bought a composting system as a trial thing for some of our park rangers. And so Chuck sends us pictures of how it's going. And like a lot of things, it was difficult at the beginning because he was trying to get the ratios right of how much food do you put in, how much moisture, how much paper in order to keep things correct. And but after you get the hang of it, you just need to, they're living, so it's a live system. And for them, they're able to use earthworms for fishing things. And then they're also creating some very nice compost that they're able to use on some of the beds. So it's turned out to be a good thing.
And we do not go into vermicomposting here, but if there's lots of information out there about it, but that would be done inside, either under the sink or in the basement is where most people do it. Obviously, you could do it outside, you know, for a couple of months in the summer, but even that you'd have to be really careful. On a really hot day, you could fry all your worms. So it's really an inside thing. You know, again, once you get it down and you know what those worms eat, you know, it's great. But again, like Amy said, you really have to keep track of it, or the worms will be coming looking for their food. And the favorite thing I like to say, especially when we talk to kids about compost, is, you know, it's basically the worm poop is what you're eating, and it is such a good quality material that the worms create by eating our garbage. So it is pretty cool. Okay, sorry, Amy. Keep going.
Oh, no. So the compost bins can be very, very basic. They can be chicken wire or cinder blocks. Usually you kind of make a three-sided thing. No fence, other fences. You can buy manufactured bins. You could do a garbage can bin as well. You know, things with the plastic in the garbage can are you need to have them big enough, so, or you have to have something that you can get in there to turn it. And then there are, you know, directly in the garden on the ground, but that, you know, you need more space, and it takes a while.
Right, and I would say especially, but if you're in a rural community and you have the land, you can have a compost pile in the back. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be one of these commercial units. It doesn't have to be contained. Containing your compost pile speeds up the process. I mean, that's part of, you know, why they, you know, they do all this. So here's, Amy, here's some
So this is just really simple with pallets and some fencing. And the pallet, once again, you're trying to aerate. So having that air coming in from the sides and underneath is a good thing. Next, wire caging. You know, it works pretty well, except sometimes if the wire is too high, it can be tough to get in there and move stuff around. But as you can see, having the wire allows at least the edges of it to be very aerated. So so that can work as well for things like leaves. A lot of people have free pallets, so these work as well. One of the things that we see if people are putting together these systems and they have the room is putting together 2 or 3 in tandem so that you can move from one to another.
There you go.
Here we go. And that will make compost, it'll compost quicker. And you get to, you know, use your equipment a lot more often.
Well, and the other thing about that is that you're always going to have your fresh stuff. So in this type of system, you keep the fresh stuff in the first one. As it starts to break down, then you move it, and you can add fresh stuff. So in a contained unit or a plastic unit, that's happening on the top, and then the bottom is where the composting is going on. So again, what's going to happen with a unit like this is everything's going to go much quicker. That's sort of what we saw in the video. Because they are actively, you know, moving it around and making these changes, that it happens, you know, a lot quicker.
And these are just a couple examples of commercial composters. There's ones where you actually churn them, like the one on the top picture. And then the one in the other corner is similar to the ones that are sold at the county compost and rain barrel sale. So you put stuff in at the top, you try and aerate, and then the mature material is at the bottom. So you can open the bottom thing and get your shovel out and get some compost out.
And you see like down at the bottom, those vents, that's a part of the whole aeration system. The top is vented. And if you do have one of these units, or if you buy one of these units, you know, again, another thing you can do is take the top off for a couple of hours to, you know, if it's raining and your compost is dry, that's a perfect way to do that. But these units are, you know, are going to speed up the process, you know, different than this kind of thing. You know, it's open to the air. And I think even the black color is part of the design. So, all right. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some problems. Because especially if you're starting out, as we mentioned, you know, it takes some time to figure all this stuff out. So and again, it's all about keeping this carbon nitrogen ratio in. So one of the things, like if it is too wet, I mentioned it being dry, you have to add, you know, you have to water it, literally water it. But if the ratios aren't quite right, you're going to see too much moisture, and that is not good. Then that's again, I think if you're doing compost correctly, it's not really going to smell. And that's, you know, there's going to be an earthy type of odor, but it's not going to be, you know, a rotting smell. It's, you know, you're not going to go, whoa, you know, what is that? So, so your nose is an important part of figuring out, you know, how things are going, and then you can diagnose a little bit. I think it looks like this picture, you know, is a garbage can where they just cut the bottom off. So, well, one of the things why we showed you all those different types of units is because we're not saying you have to go out and buy a commercial composter. There's, you know, there's so many ways you can do this. So just keep that in mind, that it's, you know, you don't have to, you know, make an investment.
And if you,
Another problem that can happen is if you add too much fruit, which is something that obviously in the summer we can do. You have a party, you have you know, 3 or 4 watermelons or whatever. Again, you've got, that's going to add way too much acid to, and I think Katie, I couldn't quite pull up the questions, but I think we may have had a question about that, about too much acid. And citrus fruit can contribute to this acidity. And it is handfuls of ground lime or wood ash is a way to add more carbons to that mix. So we're not saying you can't put, you know, those 3 watermelons, you know, rinds in that you used at your party, but if you do that, you want to make sure that you're balancing that. You want to make sure, and even that's going to be trial and error. You know, you might put in a handful and, you know, check it in a couple days, and it's still, so you might have to add more. So you know, there's no hard, steadfast rule about this stuff. You have to do some research. You have to, like I said, use your nose. But also being too dry, you know, I already mentioned that. So that's an easy one. So in the case of your compost pile being too dry, you know, it's not going to be processing. So in that case, you're not going to smell that. That's going to have to be your, you know, a visual or a touch, you know, to find out that things aren't cooking, you know, the way they should be. And when we say cooking, I mean literally, that's what's going on in the center of your compost. Varmints, you know, can be around for your compost. So this is the general rule of thumb, is that if you're composting correctly, we're not going to attract varmints, any kind of pest into your compost. But if they're around, we're not saying that that they're not going to try to find out what's going on. So this might be a situation where you would want to get a unit that's more enclosed. They also have units with bottoms that can be attached to the bottom of your composter, but they still have holes in, because it's really important that those microorganisms, that the worms, worms are such an important part. Even if you're not vermicomposting, worms are still working in your compost. And that's part of the aerating, because they're going up and down, they're pooping their gold as they add to the compost pile. So there are ways around. You just want to be conscious. That's where siting, you don't, like, if you have a shed, you maybe don't want to put it behind the shed. You want to put it somewhere where it's easier to gain access, where it's not out of sight, so that you know what's going on. So we are going to provide a resource for some of the other problems that occur with compost. I want to see. I just wanted to go back to the grass clippings. So again, if you have a big yard and you've saved, well, before we get into that, we do want to highly encourage everyone to mulch your grass. There's very little reason to collect the grass. I mean, unless it's super long and you're cutting it. But mulching our grass is very, very good for your lawn. It's putting those nutrients right back into the lawn. So there's really very little reason to collect your grass clippings. But like I said, especially at this time of year, because our lawns get long so quickly, you may have to do some grass clipping collection. There are municipalities that collect all your yard waste and take it to a compost facility, so you can feel good about that. There are plenty that don't do that, but just be careful using too many grass clippings. I'm just going to read this. Be aware that enclosed plastic compost bins let less air in than an open heap. They require extra care to ensure the balance of the dry, fresh materials. Never stamp or force materials down in order to fit more in, as you risk over compacting your compost ingredients. And this specifically, they're talking about adding these too many grass clippings to your compost pile. So again, keeping in mind the balance, that we've talked about. So, and then we want to, how fast am I going to get my compost? That's certainly a question that we get all the time. So it's not a straightforward answer. What we both, Amy and I, mentioned, it depends on how much effort you want to put into your compost pile. So I'll take myself as an example. I know that I have limited time. So the type of backyard composting I've done, I made sure that I'm using materials that don't need as much to be paid as much attention to. Besides the occasional turning and watering. But doing that, it's going to take me, or it has taken me, a lot longer to get compost. So 1 to 2 years is not out of, so this, if you start composting this season, you're really not going to benefit from that compost until next year or after, unless you really, really stay on top of it. If you look at the literature, they say you can have your compost in a few months. And, of course that's true, but it depends on how much you're putting in there and how much you're paying attention to it. So I don't want people to be disappointed that they start composting this weekend and they don't have beautiful, wonderful soil enhancing material in a month or, in 6 weeks. I'm not saying you couldn't, but it's a very much a reflection of your time and energy that you're putting into it. So, just bear that in mind and don't be disappointed if it really takes until next season. And what happens in the winter basically is that the compost pile just sort of goes into stasis. So it's okay to leave it there. It's okay if it gets buried in snow. You can add material, you know, depending on the weather, like if we get a thaw, you can add material to your compost pile in the winter. Just remember, you still have to pay attention to it. But if we get a freeze, then you don't have to worry as much, you know, and do I have to go out there and make sure it's, you know, not too dry, not too wet, because if it's frozen, you know, that's not going to be an issue. So again, this all depends on, you know, your level of interest, your time, and also where it's located. If it's obviously located in the winter way in the back, you might not even be able to get to it. So it depends on the size of your yard and how easy it is to get to. So all these things. So no matter, you know, no matter what is said about how quickly, because you saw in the video how quickly that pile decomposed, that was because, you know, there was someone basically constantly working on it, making sure, you know, that, you know, the materials were, you know, balanced properly. And that's why that, you know, there was that beautiful decomposition that we saw. But, you know, we don't want to falsely advertise that you're going to start this and you're going to get your compost right away. And again, I know we talked about this, but just these are all the different ways, you know, that once you do have your compost, you know, to use it, you know, once it's great, and it's great in the beds. But like if you have a low patch in your lawn, that's a perfect thing. Even just top dressing your lawn with compost is excellent, because again, you're enriching the soil, you're growing your soil. If you do put compost around your trees, be careful not to put the compost at the base of the tree. You should always create a space around the base of the tree. If you put your compost up right next to the tree, it actually acts to suffocate the tree a little bit. It needs to breathe. It needs the air to get to it. So in the business, it's called don't make volcanoes. You don't want to use your compost to create a volcano look on your tree. You want to, I know you can't see what I'm doing, but you want to make an opening around so that the tree can breathe. I see you laughing at me, Katie. All right, Amy, I'm going to turn this over to you for people like me that maybe don't want to spend the time.
Okay, so we currently have 2 communities that have community compost drop-off sites. So it's a food waste drop-off site. So in the city of Buffalo, and they are at farmers markets. Plus, there are actually 5 or 6 sites throughout the city where businesses are hosting the bins for putting them in. Town of Amherst.
BuffaloRecycles.org. You can find more information there if you're a City of Buffalo resident. Okay, I don't think we're gonna. My computer keeps wanting to update. So
in terms of the town of Amherst, Amherst actually has, I believe they're picking up at the farmers market. Plus, they have a dedicated drop off at maybe the highway barn.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, you know, slowly but surely, our communities are starting to, you know, they know this is something important to do, but collection is tough. So the first way to start is by having these drop-off sites. And then, you know, down the road a piece, hopefully we could move to collection. Now, Farmer Pirates does have a collections, so that you buy a subscription, which is less than $200 a year, and they will pick up your organic bin from you, once a week or once every 2 weeks?
It's every 2 weeks.
Once every 2 weeks, and they will take it to their composting site. And right now they have a limited area that they're working in. They need to have enough scale to make sense for them to be going around picking stuff up. So, you know, that would be something where if they're not in your area and you could convince multiple people on your street or in your area to want to buy the service, then perhaps they could add you onto a route. And
Yeah, and Amy, I think there's a few community, neighborhoods that are doing exactly what you're saying. They're either doing some collection and taking advantage of what the municipalities are offering, or they're using farmer pirates. And there may be someone other than farmer pirates. We are not aware. We looked into this before, and so if anybody knows of anyone else that's doing this, please let us know, because we would love to promote that as well.
mhm. And, we will have to see where this goes. I mean, what we've noted in other states and other countries where landfill space gets smaller and smaller and more expensive is that they are investing a lot more money in diverting organics. So right across the lake in Ontario, everybody has a little bin, and they have curbside pickup of organics, and you're not supposed to put your organics in with your garbage. Your garbage is supposed to be non-food. And Vermont now has a bill where everybody, businesses and residential, you are supposed to keep your organics diverted, and they will go to a compost site. And the reason that they've done that is the last landfill in Vermont is closed. So
Oh, wow.
any garbage collected in Vermont has to go to another state, and it's quite expensive. So at this point, they, being able to manage compost within the state makes it less expensive than having to truck garbage out of the area. So in the future, hopefully, we'll see more systems, and you will be able to do more things.
So again, this is, if you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to go through the hassle of composting, there are options out there. So for instance, I was mentioning my compost pile. I've kept my compost pile primarily yard waste, and that's why, I can get away without paying as much attention to it. Amy, did you want to?
Sure. We actually repurposed this for a contest thing, but this is a little bin that you can have under your sink. And this is what people start for their food composting, is just putting your scraps in the little bin with the lid, and then either taking them out to your home composting or taking them to a community compost site.
And I got to tell you, I'm very surprised, but the bins, those little kitchen containers, they do not smell. They have a nice locking system. I basically, it takes us about a week to fill that up. And I used to keep it in the fridge thinking of that it was going to smell, and then there wasn't room in the fridge. It does not smell. So, and if you want, there are compostable bags that you can purchase just to keep it a little bit cleaner, but you don't need it. But so those really work great. And they do sell them as part of the Erie County sale, which ended a few weeks ago, but they're available, everywhere, Home Depot and places like that. So easy way to do it. Or, a Folgers or a, coffee can also works perfectly, because that's got that same type of seal on it. So a 5-pound coffee container, that works to hold your food scraps too. So just like you don't need to buy, you don't need to buy anything. There's certainly ways to do it without, without purchasing that. So we did want to mention that we have this great pamphlet that the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has put together, and it really, probably better than we did, it really talks about all of these issues, including problems, and there's also information on there on the vermicomposting with the worms. So we would like to make this available to everybody that is watching us, listening to us right now. So Katie, do you want to tell them what to do, or should I tell them what to do?
Just shoot me an email. You all have it. It's catherine.earl@erie.gov. And then I'll pass your address along to Gary and Amy.
And, if I'm sure that this is somewhere on the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation website, if you don't want to wait, but we've got them. and we're more than happy to put them in the mail because, again, super great information. And it really just goes through all this stuff. I know we've thrown a lot at you, but it really it's good information. And that's us. And again, as Katie mentioned, you are welcome to email us any questions. We're more than happy to. I guess Amy, I should put you first because you're an A and I'm a C. But so yes, any waste related question, we're happy to answer. We will put in a little plug that Erie County has a program in place where residents can bring up to 50 pounds of household hazardous waste anytime, well, almost anytime they want, to a facility in Tonawanda. So we did have a household hazardous waste collection a few weeks ago. If you missed it and are looking to get rid of oil-based paint, pesticides, chemicals, things like that, all these materials, you can send us a request. We'll send you a link. You do have to pre-register for this program, but we're very excited about it because for years all we could do was tell people, well, we're having 2 of these. You'll have to wait until we have the next one. Now we do have this option for people, which we're happy about. So, Katie, is there questions? Because I just didn't see the questions.
I'm seeing quite a few questions actually. Some you have already answered, but we might need a little more clarification if that's okay. And I know we're coming up on time, but do you have time for these?
Oh, sure.
Okay. All right. So we had a question come up about the water. You addressed that, but this person's wondering how to keep track of it as we go through the summer. So maybe you have any tips that you might want to share?
Yeah, it really is. It's a matter of checking. You want to be checking at least once a week. And like I said, it's that wrung out sponge. That's what your pile should be at. So if you're looking, you can see, and go beyond the top, so stick your hand in there and you might feel that moisture. But that's really what we want to do. And obviously if it's 90 degrees, for 3 days in a row, it's going to dry out, so you should definitely, or a lot of times if I know it's going to rain, I will just undo the top. But then I have to say, then you do have to run out there in the middle of a downpour because, oh my God, my compost pile is going to get too wet, but at least that will go through it. Even if you have a bottom on your composter, like I said, there are holes in there, but you're going for that dry or that wrung out sponge. That's the consistency we're looking for.
Okay, thanks. Another person is wondering if you can just review the recommended ratio of carbon to nitrogen with the browns and the greens.
Right, so it's 2 to 1. So 2 nitrogen to 1 carbon. So, if you're throwing in, let's say, that container of your food waste, that container that Amy showed, then so that's your carbon. So then you're going to want to throw in a couple handfuls of leaves or twigs are really good too, as long as they're broken up. Like I said, you don't want a big stick, but twigs are great. Brown hay, and that's another thing. If you're really, like, especially in the middle of the summer, you've used up your leaves and you don't have a lot of brown, hay is a recommendation. You can go buy a quarter bale or something like that at a farmer's market or at a a roadside vegetable place. That's a good one. Wood chips, that's another one. So if you maybe get a pile of wood chips, you can throw them in. And this also talks about that, examples of your 2 to 1.
Okay,
And Amy,
thanks.
feel free to jump in there if I forgot anything.
I'm going to jump down to this next question. It's kind of funny. My lawn is basically weeds. Can I still put my clippings in the compost?
That's an interesting question. I think that you can, because it's not like you're putting the you're not digging the weed and getting the root. You're really just getting the top, and it's cut up. So I think because my lawn is a lot of weeds too. So because so you're already doing half the work. Now, you know, there is I think it's creeping Charlie that are in a lot of our lawns, and that could overwhelm the system a little bit. So I think you'd have to be careful. I would almost suggest that that's a great question for the Cornell Master Gardeners. They have a hotline that you can call. I'm afraid I don't know it off the top of my head, but you
And
can.
they'll be at the plant sale at Symphony Circle this
Oh,
Friday and Saturday.
that's right. That's right. So yeah, if and they're going to be there. Master Gardeners will be there if you're in that area. But that's a really great question for them. But I really think if everything's already chopped up by your lawnmower, then you're not. It's not like I said. We're talking about if you're digging out weeds, which includes the roots and the whole thing. That's what you don't, because then you would really need this high heat. But yeah, but great question. I love questions that I don't quite know the answers to.
Well, thank you. We just have two more that I'm seeing, if that's okay.
Sure.
This one is going back to smell, but we just purchased a composter from Erie County. Is there anything we can add to mitigate the smell, like lime?
So there are definitely additives. There are additives to actually even speed up the process. The lime is specific if it's too acidic. So I think, again, if you send us your address, let us get. Now, I don't know if they can answer this, but those composters used to come with a book. I don't know if they still do. That book is also a really good resource. And someone mentioned that recently they bought one, and I don't know that it comes with a book anymore. But that, because it's so hard to tell, you know, exactly what you're putting in and what might be causing that smell. That's why, or you know, if you're online, you know, you can even Google that. But and there are actual you know, materials you can purchase to speed up your composting process. I've never tried that, but I know that they're out there, and that would then contain those materials that would help with some of that.
Right, but it might be good to add in a layer of shredded paper on top to try and
Oh,
reduce the smells.
that is Amy, I'm so glad you said that. I was working a food waste collection at a farmer's market recently. Well, that wasn't recently, but it was a while ago. But and the booth next to us started complaining about the smell, you know, because it wasn't compost, it was just food waste. We put a layer of newspaper. That smell stopped immediately. I had no idea. So Amy is 100% right. If you add shredded paper or shred up your newspaper, that works too. That will help. That will help a lot. Thank you, Amy. That's a great answer.
Thank you for that. It just came in. There's no book, but a Wheeler handout.
Okay.
And this is the last question I'm seeing. It says, my direction said not to use black walnut, so should I avoid leaves in backyard as they may contain theirs?
I think that that's true. I think, but there's something about black walnut that, and I can't remember exactly, but
They've
you
got
know.
a toxicity to them, so they kill other plants.
But
So
if
that
they were dried, like if they were the leaves left over from the fall, then you're probably okay, unless you have. Are you looking that up?
I'm gonna try and look that up. I don't know.
Again, another great question for a master gardener because they're gonna be way more knowledgeable about this than us. But so if you have a huge pile of black walnut leaves, you know, then probably not. But if you're gonna mix some of those in, it's probably okay. I just think once the leaf decomposes, it's not like it's you know, they're not as toxic. But Amy, I don't know if you're finding a better answer than that.
I am looking, I'm not getting an answer very quickly, so that would be
So
something that
I
we
would
need to
really
look
double check
into, but
with
it's a
master.
great question.
Yeah, I would double check with the master gardeners about that. And we'll try to find it's a really good question. We should know the answer to.
I'm going to give a shout out to Carrel for putting the master hotline our Master Gardener hotline in here. It's
Nice.
716-652-5400. So thank you, Carol.
And Master
Yes.
Gardeners, you can ask them any question and they answer it so calmly and nicely. So even if it's a silly question, they have a good answer.
And I'm just seeing another thing that popped in here, and then I'll let you guys go because I've had you for a while. But this person is wondering, can mango be composted? Because I heard it might be toxic.
I have not heard that. I have not heard any problem with mango, but again, we are not the ultimate answer here. But so I would have to say, again, a mango is not going to be a problem. If you're putting, the waste of 10 or 15 mangoes, that's maybe where the problem comes in. I think again, it's always about the amounts of things. So that would be my somewhat uninformed answer. Full disclosure. But I had not heard that. I had not heard that at all about mangoes.
Hey, well, thank you both. I'm not seeing anything else other than thank yous. Thank you. I'm no longer afraid of composting.
All right.
Thank you. I'm excited to get started. So this is wonderful. You guys are a blast to work with. I appreciate your time. And to everyone who's on, thank you.
Well, right back at you, Katie. Thanks so much for inviting us and allowing us this forum, because we really do appreciate it very much.
Of course. And you guys will be back on Friday, June 18th at 2 p.m. for Plastic This and Plastic That. So
Plastic this
come
and
back.
that. Who knows what we'll be telling you about that.
Who knows?
Oh, goodness. Well, I can't wait to find out. So I will talk with you both offline, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot.